My name is Rebecca Dominic, and I'm 34 years old. 3 weeks ago, at my stepmother's twins' birthday party, she stood up in front of a room full of her relatives, smiled at me, and called me greedy. "It's just not right," she said, holding the cake knife, her voice warm as a Sunday sermon. Rebecca is living alone in that big, beautiful house her mother left her, while these two precious babies are sharing a room. Real family shares everything. That's all I'm saying. Real family shares. My father nodded along. He didn't look at me. He looked at his plate. I didn't argue. I've learned that arguing with Brenda is like arguing with the weather. You don't win, you just get wet. I just smiled, and I waited for the doorbell. And when it rang, and the woman on the porch stepped inside, my stepmother dropped the cake knife. It hit the hardwood floor my grandfather laid with his own hands in 1958, and the whole room went quiet. Because the woman at the door was someone Brenda had spent 11 years telling me was gone. Before I go any further, if you've ever been the child of a first marriage, the one a step-parent tried to erase, take a second to like and subscribe. It helps this story reach the people who need it. And drop your city and the time where you're listening from in the comments. I love seeing how far these stories travel at night. I'm Rebecca. This is the story of a house 3 generations of women built, a stepmother who tried to take it, and the grandmother she swore I'd never see again. To understand the woman at the door, you have to understand the house. And to understand the house, you have to go back before any of us, back to 1958, and a young couple with a mortgage and a dream. The house is on a quiet street in East Sacramento, the kind of street with old elms that meet over the road in summer so you drive through a green tunnel. White clapboard, deep front porch, a swing my grandfather hung from a chain so heavy it'll outlast all of us. My grandparents bought it in 1958, newly married, dirt broke. My grandfather, Walter, was a finished carpenter. He couldn't afford to buy the finished house, so he bought it half-built and did the rest himself on weekends for 2 years. The floors are his. The built-in bookshelves in the front room are his. The banister you slide your hand down going upstairs. He carved that by hand in the garage the winter my mother was born. My grandmother, Agnes, made the rest. She planted the garden that's still there. She painted the kitchen the particular soft yellow it's been my whole life, repainting it the same shade every decade so it never changed. She raised my mother in that house. And when my mother grew up and married my father, the house eventually passed to her, to my mother Diane, because that's how it worked in our family. The women kept the house. The women kept each other. I was born in that house in 1991. My earliest memory is the yellow kitchen, my mother's hands, and my grandmother's hands, both working at the same counter, flour everywhere, the radio on. 2 women who loved each other and me underfoot, and the smell of bread. If you asked me to draw the word safe, I would draw that kitchen. Let me tell you about that kitchen, because it's the center of everything that comes after. The counter was a long stretch of butcher block my grandfather had cut and sanded, and over the years it took on a dip in the middle from 60 years of kneading and rolling and chopping. My grandmother used to put my small hand in the dip and say, "Your great-grandmother's hands made part of this, and mine, and your mother's. You're standing in a line of women, Rebecca. Don't ever let anyone tell you you started alone." There was a windowsill over the sink where 3 generations had kept the same things. A little jar of wooden spoons gone soft and pale, a clay pot of basil in summer, a transistor radio that only got one station clearly and nobody ever tuned away from it. On the door frame between the kitchen and the hall, there were pencil marks, heights, and dates. My mother's, going up year by year in my grandmother's careful printing. Then mine, in my mother's. 3 of us measured against the same piece of wood. When you grow up in a house like that, you don't think of it as a building. You think of it as a body you live inside, a body made of the people who came before you. My grandmother Agnes made the soul of the place. She planted the garden that's still there, roses along the south fence, a fig tree that drops fruit on the patio every August, a row of lavender she swore kept the moths out of the linen closet. She painted the kitchen the particular soft yellow it's been my whole life, repainting it, the same shade every decade, so it never changed. She raised my mother in that house, and when my mother grew up and married my father, the house eventually passed to her, to my mother Diane, because that's how it worked in our family. The women kept the house. The women kept each other. So when I tell you the house is mine, I don't mean it the way you own a car. I mean it the way you belong to a place that has held 3 generations of your family's hands. My grandfather's hands on the banister, my grandmother's on the garden, my mother's on the yellow walls, and mine, learning to walk across my grandfather's floors. That's the house Brenda called a thing to be shared, like it was a casserole dish, like it was nothing. But I'm getting ahead of myself, because for the longest time I almost let her win. Not because she was strong, but because I was tired, and grief makes you small. And she was very, very good at moving into the empty spaces grief leaves behind. My mother got sick when I was 14, breast cancer. It moved fast. I won't spend long here, because some of you know exactly what this part feels like, and I won't make you live it twice. 2 years of hospitals, of my grandmother Agnes practically moving into help, of my father getting quieter and quieter, the way some men go silent instead of falling apart where you can see it. And somewhere in those 2 years, a woman named Brenda appeared. She came in as a friend of a friend originally, someone from my father's work whose own marriage had ended, who started bringing casseroles, then started staying to help with the dishes, then started being there so often that I stopped noticing when she arrived because she never seemed to leave. I want to be fair because the truth is sharper than a cartoon. At first, Brenda helped. When you're drowning, you don't ask too many questions about the hand that grabs you. She drove me to school when my father couldn't. She sat in the waiting room. And my grandmother, my sharp, watchful grandmother, was the only one who looked at Brenda with anything other than gratitude. I remember Agnes watching her once across the hospital cafeteria, very still, the way she watched a pie she wasn't sure was done, and saying quietly to no one, "That one's measuring the rooms." I didn't know what she meant. I was 15. I thought she meant something about the hospital, but my grandmother saw it early. The way old women often see the things the rest of us are too tired or too hopeful to see. She told me later that she'd watched Brenda do small things that didn't add up. The way Brenda started answering my father's phone so he could rest. The way she began organizing the house, labeling, sorting, deciding what stayed and what went, while my mother was still alive to have an opinion, just too sick to give one. The way she'd say "we" about a family she'd known for 18 months. She didn't move in like a friend, Agnes said. She moved in like a tide, a little higher every day, so slow you couldn't point to the moment the water reached your door. Those last months, the house filled with the particular quiet of a place organized around someone dying. My grandmother more or less lived with us, sleeping in the spare room, keeping the kitchen running, keeping me fed and on some kind of schedule so that one part of my life stayed solid. She'd sit with my mother for hours. I'd hear them through the wall sometimes. Not the words, just the murmur. Two women who'd stood at the same counter saying whatever there is to say at the end. My grandmother was the one who held that family together in the dying, not Brenda. I need you to understand that because Brenda would spend the next 2 decades rewriting it. My mother died when I was 16, April. The elms were just coming back green in the weeks before she died. When she could still talk, she said things to me. I keep folded up in the most protected part of myself. But there's one I'll share, because it matters to this story. She held my hand in the hospital bed, and she was looking at the window, and she said, "The house is yours, Rebecca. Grandma's house, my house, your house, 3 of us. You keep it. No matter who tells you to give it up, and someone will, you keep it. It's the one thing I get to leave you that nobody made. We made it." I said, "Okay, Mom." She said, "Promise me out loud." I promised her out loud. And then she said one more thing. So quietly I had to lean in. She said, "Your grandmother knows everything. If you ever get confused about what's true, you go to her. She was there for all of it. She's the one who remembers." I didn't understand at 16 why she said it like a warning. I thought she just meant Grandma was old and wise. I know now she meant something more specific. She'd already watched the tide come in. She was telling me where the high ground was. I was 16. I had no idea I'd spend my 30s keeping that promise against the woman who was already, even then, measuring the rooms. I didn't know that the hardest promises to keep aren't the dramatic ones, not the deathbed vows you imagine yourself defending in some grand moment, but the quiet, grinding ones, kept across years, against someone who never raises her voice, who only ever smiles, who makes you feel cruel for the crime of remembering your own mother. That's the promise I'd been handed. I just didn't know yet how long or how lonely the keeping of it would be. My father married Brenda 2 years after my mother died. I was 18, just leaving for college. The timing felt like a door closing behind me as I walked out of it. I didn't fight it. What would I have fought? My father was lonely. Brenda was capable, organized, certain about everything in a way that's restful when you've spent 2 years in chaos. I told myself she made him happy. I told myself it wasn't my business. I went to college in San Francisco, became an elementary school teacher, built a quiet life around other people's children, and I let the house in East Sacramento sit mostly closed up, the way you leave a church when you can't bear to pray in it yet. Here's the thing I have to own. I was so busy surviving my own grief that I didn't notice, for years, what Brenda was slowly doing. She wasn't loud about it. That's the part people don't understand about women like her. They don't slam doors. They close them so gently you don't hear the latch. The first thing to go was the photographs. I came home one Christmas, I was maybe 22, and the framed pictures of my mother that had always been on the mantel were gone. When I asked, Brenda said so kindly, "Oh, sweetheart, I thought it might be healthier for everyone to look forward instead of back. They're in a box. Safe, you can have them any time." She'd redecorated the whole front room. New paint. She'd painted over my grandfather's bookshelves, a flat modern gray. I stood in the room I'd learned to walk in and didn't recognize it. I should have said something then. I think about that a lot. But I was 22 and grief stupid, and Brenda had a way of making any objection sound like you were the one being difficult. If I'd said, "Put my mother's pictures back," she'd have widened her eyes and said something about how she'd only been trying to help everyone heal, and somehow I'd have ended up apologizing. She was a genius at that particular move, committing the offense, and then standing in the wreckage looking wounded until you comforted her for it. I've since learned there's a name for that. At 22, I just knew that every conversation with Brenda ended with me feeling like the unreasonable one, and I didn't have the strength to keep losing. So I stopped playing. Then it was the holidays. Slowly, year by year, the gathering shifted to Brenda's side of the family. Her sisters, her cousins, her parents while they lived. My mother's relatives, my grandmother, my Aunt Carol, got invited less. Then not at all, always with a reason. The reasons were always reasonable. That's the trick. Each individual reason made sense. Grandma tires easily. Carol and Brenda had a little friction. Let's keep the peace this year. The drive's so far for them. It was only the pattern, seen from a distance, that was monstrous. Any single year, you'd say. That's just how it worked out. 10 years stacked up, you'd say, someone built this. And the biggest absence, the one I'm most ashamed I let happen, was my grandmother. Agnes lived across town. After my mother died, I leaned on her, called her, visited, and then somewhere in my mid-20s, the contact thinned. Brenda managed the family calendar by then, the family communications, the way capable people do. And what Brenda told me, gently, repeatedly, over years, was that Agnes was declining. "Her memory's going, Rebecca. She gets confused. She got upset last time and didn't even recognize your father. The doctor says visits can agitate her. It's kinder to let her rest." I believed it. God forgive me, I believed it. I was busy, and grief had taught me that people leave, and it was easier to believe my grandmother was fading than to drive across town and find out. And here's the cruelest part of how it worked. Every detail Brenda gave me was specific enough to sound like truth. She didn't just say, "Your grandmother's not well." She said, "She called your father Walter last Tuesday," using my dead grandfather's name. A detail so precise it had to be real. It wasn't. But how do you doubt a detail like that? You don't. You picture your grandmother confused and calling for her dead husband, and your heart breaks, and you stay away to spare her the agitation, exactly as you've been told. The lie wore the costume of mercy. I sent cards. They went unanswered. And Brenda explained that too. Agnes couldn't really write anymore. I stopped sending them. I told myself I was respecting her peace. What I was actually doing was participating, unknowingly, in the slow disappearance of the one woman who could contradict everything Brenda was building. For almost 11 years, I let a wall be built between me and the last living woman who'd stood at that yellow counter with my mother. I let Brenda tell me my grandmother was as good as gone. That was Brenda's masterpiece. Not taking the house, taking the witness. The thing about a lie that's careful is that it only takes one crack. The crack came in January, 3 months ago, at my Aunt Carol's house. Carol is my mother's younger sister. Brenda never fully managed to push her out because Carol is loud and stubborn and shows up whether she's invited or not, which I now understand is a kind of superpower. I was at Carol's for her birthday. We were doing dishes, the two of us, and out of nowhere she said, "You should call your grandmother more, you know. She asks about you every single week. Breaks her heart you never visit." I stopped with a plate in my hand. I said, "Aunt Carol, Grandma doesn't really know who I am anymore. Her memory." Carol turned off the water. She looked at me like I'd said something in a language she didn't speak. "Rebecca, what are you talking about?" I had lunch with Agnes on Tuesday. She did the crossword in pen and corrected my grammar twice. Her memory's better than mine. The kitchen went very far away for a second. I remember gripping the edge of the counter. I remember the particular sound of the faucet dripping in the new silence. Brenda said, I started, and Carol's face changed slowly into something I'd never seen on her, a kind of dawning fury. Brenda said what exactly? I told her. 11 years of it, laid out in the order Brenda had fed it to me. The declining memory, the agitation, the doctor who said the visits weren't kind, the unanswered cards, the details about Grandma calling my father Walter. I watched my aunt's face as I talked, and I watched her understand something faster than I could, because she'd had the missing half of the picture the whole time, and just never knew the other half existed. Carol sat down at her own kitchen table. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Honey, your grandmother has called this house every Christmas for 11 years, asking if you'd be there. Brenda always said you couldn't make it, that you were busy, that you'd moved on, and it was painful for you to be around the old family." She reached across and took my hand. "Each of you was told the other one didn't want to come. She built a wall and told the people on both sides of it that the other side put it up." I asked her, because some part of me still couldn't believe it, still wanted there to be an innocent explanation, whether she was sure, whether maybe Grandma really did have good days and bad days, and Brenda had just seen the bad ones. Carol laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Rebecca, your grandmother volunteers at the library twice a week. She drove herself here today. She beat me at Scrabble on Sunday so badly I accused her of cheating. She squeezed my hand hard. There's nothing wrong with that woman's mind except an 11-year-old broken heart. And I should have said something years ago. I knew Brenda kept her away from the big house. I didn't know she told you she was senile. I'd have driven over and dragged you to her myself. I don't remember driving home that night. I remember sitting in my car outside my own apartment for an hour, shaking, doing the math on 11 years, and understanding for the first time the full shape of what had been done. Not just to me, but to a 74-year-old woman across town who'd been doing the crossword in pen and waiting for a granddaughter who'd been told she was senile. 11 Christmases, 11 years of a woman picking up a phone and being told the girl she helped raise had moved on and didn't want her. I thought about my mother saying she's the one who remembers, and I understood, finally and far too late, that it had been a set of directions, and I'd spent 11 years walking the opposite way. The next morning, I called my grandmother's number, the one Carol gave me, my hands trembling so hard I misdialed twice. She picked up on the second ring. Her voice was exactly the same. Exactly. 30 years fell away. Whitfield residence. "Grandma," I said, and then I couldn't say anything else. There was silence on the line. And then my grandmother said, in a voice that broke right down the middle, "Rebecca, oh my girl, I knew you'd find your way back. I told your mother you would. I promised her you would." I drove to my grandmother's apartment that afternoon. It took everything I had not to speed. She opened the door before I knocked. She'd been watching from the window, she admitted, since we hung up, like a girl waiting for a date. She was smaller than I remembered, white-haired now, but her eyes were my eyes, and my mother's eyes, sharp and present and brimming. We stood in her doorway and held each other, and neither of us could speak. Two women who'd each been told the other was a ghost. When we finally sat down, she made tea, her hands steady, no confusion anywhere in her. She told me everything. She'd never declined. She'd never been agitated by my visits, because there hadn't been any visits to be agitated by. She'd been cut off methodically by a woman who understood that the danger to her project wasn't a 16-year-old's promise or a dead woman's wishes. The danger was a living witness, someone who had stood in that yellow kitchen, who remembered who built the banister, who knew exactly what the house was and what Diane had wanted, and what Brenda was. "She came to me, you know," Agnes said. "About 4 years ago, Brenda. She drove all the way out here, sat right where you're sitting, and she was so sweet. She said the family thought it would be healthiest if the house were sold, and the money split fairly among all the children, meaning her twins. She wanted me to talk to you, to tell you it was the grown-up thing to do, to share." Agnes's jaw set, and for a moment I saw the woman who'd watched Brenda across a hospital cafeteria 20 years ago. I told her that house was left to my granddaughter by my daughter, and that it would go to Rebecca over my dead body, and not one day sooner. She smiled at me the whole time. And then I never heard from any of you again. She made sure of it. I asked her why she hadn't fought harder, why she hadn't shown up, made a scene, forced the issue. My grandmother looked at me with an old woman's terrible patience. "Because she'd convinced your father I was losing my mind. If I'd come pounding on the door, I'd have proven her right. An old woman making a scene is just a crazy old woman. I had no proof of anything except my own memory, and she'd already poisoned that well." She set down her tea. "I've been waiting, Rebecca, 11 years, waiting for one of two things: for you to find your way back to me on your own, or for her to push you so far that you'd finally need me. I prayed it would be the first. And it was almost the second," I said. It was almost the second, she agreed. I want to tell you what it did to me, hearing that. Because for 11 years, I'd carried a low, constant guilt that I'd abandoned my grandmother to her decline, that I was a bad granddaughter who'd let an old woman fade alone because I was too busy with my own life. And in the space of one afternoon, that guilt turned into something else entirely. Not relief, something harder. Because the guilt had at least been mine to fix. This new thing, the understanding that someone had engineered my guilt on purpose, had used my love for my grandmother as a lever against both of us. That wasn't something I could fix by being a better person. It had been done to me, to us, deliberately. And I sat in my grandmother's small, bright living room and felt 11 years of misplaced shame curdle, slowly, into something I'd never really let myself feel toward Brenda before. Clarity, the cold kind. Then she got up, went to her closet, and brought out a box. Inside were the photographs. Not all of them, but copies she'd kept of her own. My mother at the yellow counter, my grandfather on the porch swing, me as a baby in that kitchen. She'd kept her own copies of everything, she explained, precisely because she'd suspected years ago that the originals at the house might have an accident. I've buried a husband and a daughter, she said. I know how fast the proof of a life can disappear if somebody wants it gone, so I made copies, an old woman's insurance. She'd outmaneuvered Brenda years before I even knew there was a game, and underneath the photos, a letter sealed, my name on the front in my mother's handwriting. Your mother gave me this the week before she died, Agnes said. She told me, don't give it to Rebecca when I'm gone. Give it to her the day she needs to be reminded who she is. You'll know the day. My grandmother put it in my hands. I think the day is coming soon. Don't open it yet. Open it when she makes her move. You'll want your mother's voice in your pocket when she does. I held that envelope and I cried in a way I hadn't cried since the funeral. Not the quiet leaking I'd done for years, but the real thing. The kind that bends you over. My grandmother sat next to me on her little couch and held me. A 74-year-old woman holding a 34-year-old woman. And she didn't say they're there. And she didn't tell me to stop. She just said, cry it out, baby. You've got 11 years saved up. Take your time. So I did. I took my time. And when I was done, for the first time since I was 16, I didn't feel alone in the world. Over the next weeks, the two of us, and Carol, who appointed herself to the cause with the ferocity of a woman making up for lost time, began to plan. Not a lawsuit. My grandmother was very clear about that. You can't sue someone for lying about a phone call, she said. And anyway, that's not what needs fixing. What needs fixing is that this woman has told a whole family a story. And the only way to undo a story is to tell a truer one, louder, in the same room. She'd been a church-going woman her whole life, my grandmother, and she had an old-fashioned faith in the power of the truth said out loud in front of witnesses. Let her perform, Agnes said. She always does. Let her stand up and say her piece in front of all her people, and then I'll knock on the door. Brenda made her move 3 weeks later, and she made it, as always, with a smile. It was a family gathering, a casual one, supposedly at my father and Brenda's house, which had once been a normal dinner but had become, over the years, Brenda's stage. I'd started coming again, carefully, because I was rebuilding something with my father in the small windows when Brenda wasn't in the room. He's not a strong man, my father. I'd made my peace with that, but he's not a cruel one either, and I'd begun to suspect he believed some of Brenda's stories about my grandmother as fully as I had. The twins' birthday was coming up. Brenda mentioned over dinner, in front of everyone, that the twins were getting too big to share a room, and wasn't it a shame? With such a big house just sitting there, with only one person in it. She didn't name the house. She didn't have to. Everyone knew. Some people, Brenda said, cutting her chicken, smiling, hold on to things out of spite, out of greed, even, when real family would share. That's all I believe in. Real family shares everything. My father nodded at his plate. I want you to notice the craftsmanship because I'd finally learned to see it. She never said, "Give me the house." She'd never once in 11 years said a single thing you could quote back to her as a demand. She said, "Some people," and "It's a shame," and "Real family shares." And she let the room assemble the accusation themselves, so that if I objected, I'd be objecting to a general principle about family love, and I'd look like exactly what she'd named me: greedy. She'd spent over a decade making herself the warm one and me the cold one, so that when the moment came, the room was already primed. The house was the prize, but the long game had always been the story, and she'd been telling it so patiently for so long that most of the people at that table genuinely believed sweet Brenda just wanted her babies to have a bedroom, and selfish Rebecca was sitting on a mansion out of spite. And I felt the old reflex rise, the urge to absorb it, to keep the peace, to let weather be weather. The 16-year-old who promised out loud. The 22-year-old who watched her grandfather's bookshelves get painted gray and said nothing. But I had a letter in my purse now. I had my grandmother's phone number in my favorites. I had 11 stolen years sitting in my chest like a stone. And I had a 74-year-old woman across town who had been waiting more than a decade for me to stop absorbing and start standing. So instead of absorbing it, I smiled back at Brenda and I said, "You know what? You're right. Let's talk about the house. Let's talk about it at the twins' party. In front of everyone, let's get the whole family together and really talk about who that house belongs to." Brenda's smile flickered, just for a second, the way a flame does when a door opens somewhere in the house. She hadn't expected agreement. Agreement was new. In 11 years, I'd never once met her in the open. I'd only ever retreated, gone quiet, gone home. A retreating opponent she knew how to handle. An advancing one was a different thing. "That's very mature, Rebecca," she said, recovering. But her eyes had narrowed a fraction, searching my face for the catch. "I think so," I said. "I'll even bring someone who knows the house better than anyone, someone who can settle it once and for all." "Oh," said Brenda. "Who's that?" I just smiled. "It's a surprise." I watched her try to figure it out for the rest of the evening. She kept glancing at me over the dishes, over coffee. That small, calculating recalibration happening behind her eyes. She had no idea. In her version of the world, the only person who could know the house better than anyone was either dead or senile. She'd buried both of my witnesses so thoroughly that she'd forgotten one of them was still very much alive, still did the crossword in pen, and was already, that very week, choosing what to wear. If you've ever had to decide between keeping the peace one more time and finally setting it down in front of everyone, tell me below what you chose and what it cost you. I want to know I'm not the only one who waited too long and then, one day, didn't. The party was on a Saturday afternoon. Maybe 18 people, Brenda's sisters, her cousins, a couple of neighbors, the twins, and their friends shrieking in the backyard. My father at the grill, pretending the day was simple. I helped set up. I was calm in a way that frightened me a little. I'd spent 3 weeks planning this with my grandmother and my Aunt Carol, the two of them on speakerphone like a pair of generals, Agnes insisting on the timing. Not at the start. Let her perform first. Let her say it in front of God and everyone, then I'll knock. Carol would drive her and wait in the car until I texted. I want to be honest about the morning of, because it wasn't all cold resolve. I sat in my car outside the house, my parents' house now, though it had been a normal house once, for 10 minutes before I went in, and I shook. Not from fear of Brenda, from the weight of what I was about to do to my family, even a family this broken. Because here's the thing nobody tells you about finally standing up. Even when you're completely in the right, even when the other person earned every bit of it, you still have to be the one who breaks the long silence. And breaking a silence that old feels like breaking a bone. I knew that after today, nothing would go back to the comfortable lie. I knew my father would be hurt. I knew the twins might lose something. And I almost texted Carol to turn the car around and take Grandma home, to do this quietly, to spare everyone. Then I thought about my grandmother choosing her good blue coat, 11 years of Christmases, a woman doing the crossword in pen, waiting. And I thought about my mother's voice, promise me, out loud. You can't keep a promise quietly, that was made out loud. I got out of the car. The cake came out at 4. Brenda had made it the centerpiece, the way she made everything a centerpiece. 2 layers, the twins' names in blue and pink, a long knife laid beside it on the good platter. And Brenda, who could never resist a stage, tapped her glass. She thanked everyone for coming. She talked about family, about the twins, about how blessed she was. And then, smooth as anything, she turned to me. While we're all together, she said warmly, I want to say something from the heart. Some of you know our Rebecca has been living all alone in her mother's old house. A huge house, 4 bedrooms, all that space just for her. And these 2 babies are squeezed into one room. She put a hand on her chest. I've never wanted to push, but real family shares. And I think it's time. As a family, we talk about doing the loving thing, the fair thing. She smiled at me, the cake knife in her hand. Rebecca, sweetheart, don't you think your mother would have wanted her grandchildren to have room to grow? There it was. She'd reached past the house. She'd reached for my mother. The room looked at me. Brenda's sisters wore the soft, prearranged sympathy of people who'd been briefed. My father stared at the grill tongs in his hand. I set down my cup. That's a good question, I said. About what my mother would have wanted. Let's ask someone who actually knows. And the doorbell rang. The lie came first, or rather the performance, because Brenda's whole life was a performance. "I'll get it," she said brightly. "Must be the neighbors?" Already moving, still holding the knife, still hosting. I said, "It's for me." I walked past her and opened the front door, and my grandmother stepped inside. Agnes Whitfield, 74 years old, white hair set, wearing her good blue coat, standing perfectly straight, holding a photo album against her chest with both hands. Behind her on the walk, Aunt Carol. My grandmother stepped over the threshold and into the house her husband built, and she looked around the redecorated room, the gray bookshelves, the missing photographs, with a slow, terrible calm. That's when Brenda dropped the cake knife. It hit the floor, my grandfather's floor, with a sound like a single hard note, and rang and went still, because Brenda had told this entire room for years the same story she told me, that Diane's mother was gone, senile, agitated, as good as dead. And here she was, upright and clear-eyed in her good blue coat, and every relative in that room who'd heard Brenda's story was now looking at a sharp, present old woman and starting silently to do the same math I'd done in my car in January. "Agnes," my father said, and his voice cracked on it. "Mom!" He calls her Mom. He always did. "They said you couldn't." "I can," my grandmother said. "I always could." She looked at him, not unkindly, just clearly. "Hello, Dwight. You've gotten old. So have I. The difference is I've been allowed to know it." Then she turned to the room, and then he denied it. Not my grandmother, but Brenda, scrambling now. "Agnes, what a wonderful surprise. We had no idea you were feeling well enough to. Rebecca, you should have told me. I'd have set a place. You'd have told me she was too confused to come," I said quietly. "The way you've told me for 11 years. So I gave them the evidence. Not paper, not a lawyer. Something better for this family." I helped my grandmother to a chair, and she opened the photo album on the coffee table, and she began in a clear voice that carried to every corner of that silenced room to give the testimony only she could give. "This house," Agnes said, turning a page, "was built by my husband Walter in 1958. That floor Brenda just dropped her knife on. He laid it himself. These," she gestured at the gray bookshelves, "were oak. He built them the year Diane was born. Somebody painted them gray." She let that sit. "I built the garden. I painted that kitchen yellow 7 times in 60 years. The same yellow, so my daughter and my granddaughter would always know it. My daughter Diane inherited this house from me, and before she died, she left it to Rebecca, and she asked her own mother, me, to make sure it stayed with her." Page. A photograph of my mother, young, laughing at the yellow counter. "I have been trying to make sure for 11 years. I was told I wasn't welcome. I was told I was losing my mind. I was told my granddaughter didn't want to see me." She looked up, and her eyes found Brenda and stayed there. "I'd like to know who told everyone that, because my mind is fine, and I never stopped wanting to see her." She turned another page. A photograph of me as a baby, held up between my mother and herself at that same counter. 3 faces, one of them gone now. "Brenda came to my apartment 4 years ago," Agnes went on, her voice never rising, which somehow made it land harder. "She sat in my own living room and asked me to convince Rebecca to sell this house and split the money among her children. I told her no. I told her that house goes to my granddaughter, and no one else. And after that day, the calls from this family stopped. The invitations stopped. I would phone every Christmas and be told Rebecca was busy, had moved on, didn't want the old family around. She closed the album gently. An old woman alone is very easy to disappear. All you have to do is tell everyone she's already gone. The room was dead silent. One of Brenda's cousins had a hand pressed to her mouth. Brenda's older sister, Janet, was staring at Brenda with an expression that was rearranging itself in real time. Then came the stronger evidence, the thing that broke it open. My Aunt Carol stepped forward into the room and said to all of them, "I've had lunch with Agnes every Tuesday for years. She's sharper than anyone here." Brenda told Rebecca her grandmother was senile. Brenda told Agnes that Rebecca had moved on and didn't want the old family around. She told each of them the other one was gone. Carol's voice shook with 11 years of fury. I sat in my kitchen in January and watched this girl find out her grandmother had been alive and well and asking for her the whole time. Ask Brenda why. Go on. Ask her to explain it. The room turned to Brenda, and then she lost control. The smile finally cracked all the way, and underneath it was something cold and furious and, for the first time, undefended. "I did this family a favor," she hissed. "That house should be sold. The money should go to the children who actually live here, to my children. Instead of sitting there as a shrine to a dead woman nobody will let anyone move past. Diane is gone, Dwight. She's been gone for 19 years, and you've all kept her like a museum. And I am done pretending." She stopped. But it was too late. She'd said it in front of everyone. A shrine to a dead woman. Sell it. Give the money to my children. She'd reached, out loud, in front of her own sisters for a house that was never hers, by stepping on the grave of the woman who'd owned it. Her pride and her resentment hanged her in a single breath, and I didn't have to say a word. And the thing is, she wasn't entirely wrong about one part, and that's what made the room go so cold. She'd kept my mother like a museum, but not out of love. She'd kept Diane preserved precisely so she could be the one who decided when to tear the museum down. She hadn't wanted us to move past my mother. She'd wanted to be the only one holding the key to the room. And now, in front of everyone, she'd finally said the quiet thing out loud, that she'd spent 19 years resenting a dead woman, and 11 of them trying to liquidate what that dead woman left her child. You could see it land on every face in the room. You could see her own sisters recalculating 2 decades of sympathy in real time. The silence after was the loudest thing I've ever heard. Brenda's own sister, the older one, Janet, set down her plate and said very quietly, "Brenda, you told us their grandmother had dementia. You told us Rebecca abandoned the family. We felt sorry for you." She looked sick. "What else did you tell us? About any of it? About any of us?" And that question, what else, hung in the air because once a family realizes one of its central stories was manufactured, every other story it's been told starts to wobble too. I watched it spread across the room like cold water finding the low places. The neighbor who'd been told I was difficult. The cousin who'd been told my mother's family didn't make an effort. All of it suddenly in question. My father had sat down heavily on the arm of the couch, his face in his hands. When he looked up, he wasn't looking at Brenda. He was looking at his mother-in-law, at Agnes, at the photographs on the table, at his first wife laughing at a yellow counter. "I let you do it," he said to the room, to no one, to himself. "I'm not going to stand here and say she fooled me. She did, but I let her. It was easier." He looked at me. "It was easier than missing your mother, Rebecca. God help me." It was the most honest thing my father had ever said. It didn't fix anything. But I've learned that honesty and repair aren't the same thing. And you take the honesty when it comes, because sometimes it's all a person has. And then I did the thing I'd been carrying in my purse for 3 weeks. I took out my mother's letter, the sealed one, my name in her handwriting, and I opened it standing in the front room of the house she grew up in, with her mother beside me, and her sister across from me, and her photograph on the table. I won't read you all of it, some of it is only mine, but I'll read you the part I read out loud that day, because the room needed to hear it, and because maybe you do too. She wrote, "Rebecca, if someone is reading this with you, it's because they tried to take the house, and that means they tried to take me, because the house is the last of me you can stand inside. Don't let them. Not out of greed. You were never greedy, my girl. You were the most generous child I ever knew. Keep it because some things are not for sharing. Some things are for keeping. Your grandmother kept it for me. I kept it for you. One day you'll keep it for someone, or you won't. But it will be your choice, made standing on your grandfather's floor, and no one gets to make it for you. I love you out loud. Say it back out loud. That's how we've always done it." I looked up, I looked at my grandmother, and I said it back out loud the way we've always done it. Brenda left the room before I finished. I heard a door close somewhere, gently, the way she always closed them. But this time, everyone heard the latch. If you've ever had to stand up for someone who couldn't stand up for themselves, a parent, a grandparent, a younger you, like this video and subscribe, because there are more of us than anyone admits. So many more. My father filed for divorce in May. I won't pretend that was simple or that I felt triumphant about it. Watching your father dismantle a life, even a poisoned one, is its own kind of grief. But he did it. He told me he couldn't stay married to someone who'd stolen his mother-in-law and his daughter from him one quiet year at a time. Brenda moved out with the twins to her sister Janet's, though I hear Janet is barely speaking to her now, which tells you how the rest of the family did its own math. I want to say something about the twins, because they're children, and none of this was theirs. Tyler and Madison didn't ask to be the reason. I've made sure they know my door's open when they're older and want to know their father's first family. The sins of a parent shouldn't become a sentence for a child. My grandmother taught me that, the same week she taught me how to keep a house. Both things, she said, are about deciding what you refuse to pass down. The house is still mine. It was never really in legal danger. My mother left it to me cleanly, and no amount of real family shares can move a deed. What was in danger was me, my certainty, my memory, my right to stand on my own floor without apologizing for it. That's what Brenda was really after. And that's what she nearly got. Not with a lawyer, but with a story, repeated gently, for 11 years. The first thing my grandmother and I did was repaint the bookshelves. We stripped the gray off ourselves, the two of us, a weekend in June, and found my grandfather's oak underneath, scarred but real. We didn't refinish it perfectly. Agnes said the scars were the point. The second thing we did was repaint the kitchen, the same yellow. The seventh coat, or the eighth. She's lost count, she says, but her hands knew the color without the can. We did it together, flowerless this time, but the radio on, two women at the same counter. The way I'd drawn the word safe my whole life. She's there most weekends now. She does the crossword in pen at the kitchen table. She corrects my grammar. I let her. We also found the box of my mother's photographs. The originals Brenda had kept safe all those years. My father brought it over himself one evening in July, after Brenda was gone. He set it on the kitchen table and stood there a long time. And then he said, "I should have looked in this box years ago. I should have looked at a lot of things." He helped me put the pictures back on the mantel where they'd always been, my mother laughing in every one. And when he picked up the frame of Diane at the yellow counter, his hands weren't steady. We don't talk about Brenda much. We talk about my mother now, which we never did for 19 years, because Brenda had made my mother a forbidden subject dressed up as a healed one. There's a lot of lost time between my father and me. We're spending it slowly. It's the only way you can spend that kind of time. I think a lot about how close it came. Not to losing the house. The house was always legally mine, and no amount of real family shares could move a deed. What nearly got taken was subtler and worse. My memory, my certainty, my grandmother, the truth itself. Brenda didn't need a lawyer or a forged signature. She needed only patience and a soft voice in 11 years. And she nearly rewrote an entire family's history with nothing but the word kindness repeated until everyone believed it. That's the part that should frighten you, if any part does. The most dangerous lies aren't shouted. They're whispered gently by someone holding a casserole for long enough that they become the air you breathe. The reason it didn't work, in the end, wasn't me. I want to be clear about that for anyone out there who's still in the soft, quiet middle of a story like this one. I almost let it work. For 11 years, I did let it work. What saved me wasn't my own strength. It was an aunt who said one true sentence over a sink, and a grandmother stubborn enough to keep doing the crossword in pen and waiting, and a mother who saw the tide coming 19 years ago and hid her own voice in an envelope for the day I'd need it. I was saved by a line of women who refused to be erased. All I did, in the end, was open the door. My mother said some things are for keeping, not sharing. I used to think that sounded selfish, before I understood the difference. Sharing is when you give something away and everyone has more. What Brenda wanted wasn't sharing. It was erasing, taking the one solid thing 3 generations of women had built and turning it into cash and silence. I kept it. I'll keep it as long as I'm able. And then it will be my choice what comes next. Made standing on my grandfather's floor, with my mother's voice in my pocket, and my grandmother's crossword on the table. They told me the woman who built this house was gone. She wasn't gone. She was just waiting for the day I'd need her. And when she walked through that door, she didn't just save a house. She gave me back the 2 women I'd lost. My grandmother, alive across town the whole time, and my mother, whose voice I finally learned to say back out loud. That's the thing greedy people never understand. The house was never the treasure. The women who built it were.